Okay, so I want you to run a quick mental simulation with me for a second.
All right, I'm with you.
It's a Monday morning. You're a manufacturer. You've spent, say, the last decade building your factory, training your staff, perfecting this whole supply chain,
Right.
all to get your product. Let's make it a high-quality cotton shirt into the United States. It costs you about 100 rupees to make.
Okay, standard export model. Thin margins, but you make up for it in volume.
Exactly. Now imagine waking up one morning, late 2025. You
Ah.
check your phone and the news is just, flashing red.
Mm-hmm.
The political winds in Washington have shifted violently. A new executive order is signed, and suddenly that shirt,
One that costs 100 rupees.
that one, as soon as it touches an American port, boom, it gets hit with a 500 rupee tax.
That's not a tax.
Oh,
That's an eviction notice. A 500% tariff isn't meant to generate revenue. It's designed to just murder a trade relationship.
it feels that way, doesn't it?
If that happened, you're not just losing profit, you're losing the whole market overnight. Your business is effectively dead by lunchtime.
Well, for a terrifying few months in late 2025, this wasn't hypothetical at all. This was the reality staring India directly in the face.
Yeah.
We're looking at source material today that covers that really volatile period, the return of America First policies, and this specific high-stakes standoff.
It was a moment of genuine economic vertigo. I mean, the analysts were reviewing, they were all predicting absolute doom.
Right.
The whole narrative was that India was going to get crushed, squeezed between its energy needs on one side and its biggest customer on the other.
And this is really the core of our deep dive today, that crash never happened.
No.
The factories didn't close. In fact, they got busier. While everyone was watching the drama in Washington, New Delhi pulled off what the sources are calling a silent masterstroke.
It's a classic case of misdirection, isn't it? The world's looking left and they just quietly go right.
Exactly. They pivoted, and they pivoted to Europe. So today, we're going to unpack how India turned a 500% tariff threat into a record-breaking trade victory,
And we'll get into the so-called Stop Russia law that started the fight.
and the divide and friend strategy that won it, and the 4 very specific countries that became India's new economic lifeline.
It's such a fascinating study in leverage. I mean, it really challenges that old idea that when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world has to catch a cold.
Right.
In this case, the U.S. sneezed, and India just went and got a different vaccine.
So let's go back to the scene of the crime, so to speak. Late 2025, the mood in Washington is aggressive. Donald Trump's back.
And the rhetoric is hot.
But what actually triggered this 500% number? I mean, it seems almost cartoonishly high. Was it just bluster?
It does seem exaggerated, but you have to understand the context. The policy focus had shifted back to this very rigid, combative version of America First. But it wasn't just about protecting jobs this time. It was weaponized trade policy. There was this draft framework circulating, informally known as the Stop Russia law.
Stop Russia. Okay, that sounds like standard sanctions talk we've heard before.
On the surface, sure. But the fine print was much, much broader. It was basically an ultimatum to the rest of the world. Washington was drawing a line in the sand.
And the line was what?
If you're financially supporting America's rivals, you don't get access to the American consumer. Simple as that.
When they say supporting rivals, what do they mean specifically? Because, India isn't sending tanks to Moscow.
No, but they were doing 2 things that drove Washington crazy. First, buying cheap Russian oil. And second, maybe even more dangerously in Washington's eyes, was India's active participation in platforms like BRICS.
Okay, let's unpack BRICS for a second. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Why was that suddenly a trigger for a 500% tariff?
Because by 2025, BRICS wasn't just a talk shop anymore. They were actively working on ways to trade in local currencies, rupees, rubles, bypassing the U.S. dollar. Exactly. And to the U.S. Treasury, that looks like a direct attack on American financial dominance.
So India was buying Russian oil to keep its inflation down and using non-dollar payment methods.
Aggressively, on both fronts. India was just prioritizing its national interest. I mean, cheap energy keeps your economy running. From New Delhi's perspective, it's just strategic autonomy.
But from Washington's perspective,
It looked like defiance. It looked like funding the enemy and undermining the dollar. So the threat came down. Comply or face punitive tariffs on all your exports.
not just oil-related stuff, everything.
Everything. That 500% figure on the shirt, that was the stick.
I want to just pause on the sheer economic terror of that moment, because if you're an Indian policymaker and you lose the U.S. market, I mean, that's the ball game, isn't it?
Historically, yes. The U.S. is the consumer of last resort. If you can't sell there, you're in deep trouble.
The assumption in Washington must have been that India had no choice.
That was the whole bet. They thought the mere threat of this would force New Delhi to apologize, cut ties with Russia, and just fall back in line. They were banking on panic.
They thought India would fold.
They thought their leverage was absolute, that the economic pain would be so severe that India couldn't possibly withstand it. But they miscalculated.
Badly.
Badly. They forgot that the India of 2025 isn't the India of 1990. It's not a country that relies on foreign aid anymore.
Right.
So while U.S. think tanks were waiting for a plea letter, the strategists in New Delhi's south blocked their external affairs ministry. They were just looking at a map.
And they realized if one door is slamming shut...
You don't just stand there and knock and you go kick open a new one.
And that brings us to Europe. Now, I have to be the skeptic here, because pivoting to Europe isn't exactly a quick fix.
No, it's not.
The European Union is notorious for its bureaucracy. Negotiating a trade deal with the EU usually takes, what, a decade?
At least. Sometimes longer. It's like herding 27 cats who all speak different languages. You need consensus on everything, from French farmers to German unions. It's slow and it's painful.
So how did India move so fast? They didn't have 10 years.
And that's the brilliant part of the move. They didn't try to. They effectively ignored the EU as a monolith.
What do you mean?
They didn't get bogged down trying to negotiate a massive treaty in Brussels. They adopted a strategy the sources are calling divide and friend.
Divide and friend. That sounds almost Machiavellian. Break that down.
Instead of dealing with the whole bloc, they identified specific economic engines within Europe, individual countries that were hungry for what India was selling.
And crucially,
countries that were themselves looking for a reliable alternative to China.
So it was a targeted, quiet diplomatic offensive, straight to the capitals.
Exactly. Berlin, Madrid, Warsaw. And the key was that it was quiet. No big press conferences. Just a steady, low-key shifting of supply chains. By the time Washington noticed the trade flows were changing, the ships were already docking in Rotterdam.
Let's get into the specifics, because the data here is really striking. The sources point to 4 key countries: Spain, Germany, Belgium, and Poland. Let's start with Spain. Why Spain?
Spain is the standout success story. It really shows the sheer scale of this shift.
When I think of Spain, I think tourism, football, olive oil. Not a massive consumer of Indian heavy industry.
And that's exactly why this flew under the radar. But look at the numbers. In just an 8-month window, April to November 2025, India's exports to Spain jumped by 56%.
56% in less than a year. That sounds like a typo.
It's unheard of for a major economy. Trade usually grows at 3 or 4%. 56 is an explosion. And we're not talking a small base either. This was about $4.7 billion in value.
So what were they buying?
A lot of things. Chemicals, heavy machinery, but huge amounts of textiles. Think about the Spanish fashion giants, like the group that owns Zara.
Didn't detect.
Right. They need massive amounts of quality textiles, and they need them fast. Spain basically absorbed a huge chunk of the apparel and chemical demand that was threatened in the U.S.
So Spain was the volume player. They soaked up the quantity.
Exactly. But if Spain was about volume, the next one, Germany, was about validation.
The economic engine of Europe.
4th largest economy in the world. And remember, Germany is a key NATO ally. They're very close to the U.S. politically.
You would think they'd align with U.S. pressure.
You'd think so. But they prioritized their own industrial survival. German imports from India grew over 9%, crossing $7.5 billion.
Okay, 9% isn't 56%, but for Germany.
For Germany, it's huge. And you have to understand, the German market is incredibly hard to crack.
Because of the standards, right?
Precisely. Germany is obsessed with quality. Selling a T-shirt is one thing. Selling precision engineering components or auto parts to a German manufacturer is a whole different ballgame.
So if you sell to Germany...
You've passed the ultimate test. It sends a signal to the rest of the world that says, Indian manufacturing has matured. It meets world-class standards. It just completely undermined the American narrative that this was all cheap, low-quality stuff.
So we have volume from Spain, validation from Germany. Then there's Belgium.
Belgium is the value hub. It's the entry point for high-value goods, specifically diamonds and specialized chemicals. That relationship hit about $4.4 billion.
And it's a logistics superpower.
Yes, get your goods into Belgium, and they can flow anywhere in Europe.
But the one I find most strategically interesting is the 4th one, Poland. The source calls Poland the surprise package. Why?
Poland is the strategic masterpiece. It's the gateway to Eastern Europe. It's one of the fastest-growing economies in the EU, and it sits right on that geopolitical fault line with Russia and Ukraine.
So by boosting exports there up about 7.6%, India wasn't just selling to Poland.
No, they were securing a distribution hub for the entire eastern bloc of the EU. Poland is becoming a massive logistics center. By embedding themselves there, India ensured that even if Western Europe slowed down, they had access to all those developing markets in the East.
So this whole strategy wasn't just sell to whoever will buy. It was building a diversified safety net.
It was portfolio management. You've got the southern door with Spain, the central industrial door with Germany, the high-value door with Belgium, and the eastern door with Poland. Get into those four, you've basically accessed the whole continent.
I want to push back on the European side of this, though. We know why India did it, survival, but why did these European countries play ball? They're U.S. allies.
That's the critical question.
Yeah.
And it wasn't charity.
Yeah.
Europe didn't do this to help India. They did it to help themselves. And the reason comes down to one word: China.
Ah, the China +1 strategy.
Exactly. Europe is just exhausted by its reliance on China. They've spent years dealing with quality control problems, data spying fears, and supply chains that just break down in a crisis. They realized they had all their eggs in the Chinese basket.
And they were desperate for a +1.
A partner that was democratic, rule-based, and big enough to scale. India fits that mold perfectly. But there's another piece to it. The quality of Indian goods has actually caught up.
This is where things like the Make in India initiative come in, right?
Yes, specifically the PLI scheme's production-linked incentives.
Break that down. What's a PLI?
Think of it as a bounty. The Indian government told companies, if you manufacture mobile phones or pharmaceuticals here and you meet these high export standards, we will literally give you cash. It subsidized the learning curve.
So they paid companies to get better at manufacturing.
Pretty much. And we're seeing the results.
Sure.
Mobile phones, engineering goods, the quality has gone way up. That's why Germany is suddenly so interested.
So the U.S. threat basically forced India to push harder on a door that Europe had already unlocked because of its China problem.
It was the perfect storm. Mutual need just rendered the U.S. threat totally ineffective.
So let's talk about that aftermath. What happened to the big, bad Stop Russia tariff? Did the U.S. actually do it?
It turned into a paper tiger.
Explain that.
A tariff is a weapon of leverage. It only works if I'm desperate for your market. If you threaten me, but I have another customer say, Germany willing to buy everything I have, your threat is meaningless.
You can just walk away.
You can just shrug and say, okay, I won't sell to you. Because India wasn't desperate. The U.S. lost its power.
And the numbers back this up.
Overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
In the 2024-2025 fiscal period, we see a historic crossover. The European Union actually replaced both the U.S. and China as India's single largest trading partner.
That's a huge shift in the geopolitical map.
The gravity just shifted. Total trade hit $136.5 billion, but the really important number is the surplus. India exported nearly $76 billion to the EU. They're selling way more than they're buying.
Which puts them in a very healthy position. They're profiting from Europe.
Right, and it's not just transactional anymore. It's not just, I make a shirt, you buy a shirt.
I saw mentions of joint ventures. That implies a much deeper relationship.
Deep integration. German auto giants opening plants in India for export. Spanish renewable energy firms building infrastructure. Belgian pharma research happening in Indian labs.
It's moving from just sourcing to co-creating.
And technology transfer. That is the holy grail for a developing economy. When a German company sets up shop, they bring tech and training that elevates the entire industrial ecosystem. You can't undo that.
So, bringing it all back, the U.S. threatened a 500% tariff. They thought India would buckle. Instead, India reorganized its trade map, made Europe its #1 partner. What was the reaction in Washington?
Not good. Confusion, mainly. But what's really interesting is the domestic backlash.
From whom?
From American companies. They started lobbying against their own government's tariff threats.
Why? I thought America First was supposed to help them.
They're terrified. They see their European competitors, Siemens, Zara, getting preferential access to the Indian market. They realized if the U.S. walls itself off, American companies are the ones losing access to 1.4 billion consumers.
It's a classic case of unintended consequences. The policy ended up putting European competitors first.
Exactly. The attempt to isolate India actually accelerated its integration with the West, just not the American West.
And looking ahead, the India-EU Free Trade Agreement is back on the table.
It's on the fast track. The goal they've set is massive, $1 trillion in exports by 2030. If that FTA goes through, tariffs on Indian goods in Europe could drop to near zero.
It really feels like we're watching the end of an era where one country can just call all the shots.
I think that's the ultimate lesson here. The world is no longer unipolar. We've moved into a multipolar economic order where you have options.
If you're big enough.
If you're a large economy like India, you have options. You can pivot. You can walk away from a bad deal. This whole episode proves that economic bullying has diminishing returns.
It raises a really provocative question, though. If a country can just walk away from American pressure and actually succeed, do better, what does that mean for the future of American power?
It suggests that partnership is becoming more valuable than threats. If you try to use the stick, the other side might just go find a carrot somewhere else.
A fascinating shift, all triggered by attacks on a shirt.
Sometimes the biggest avalanches start with the smallest pebbles.
That is all for this deep dive. A powerful reminder that when one door closes, you don't just stand there knocking. You go build a new door. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.